Welcome to episode 7, titled Time is Money. This is off the back of an article written by Phoenician Hunter, and it is the Phoenician Secret Doctrine Part 2, which is off the back of the last episode, number 6, titled The Power of God. So, welcome, Phoenician Hunter.
Hi, it's good to be back for another podcast. What are we're doing this week is part 2. So we're sort of part 2 from The Power of God, and I've titled this one Time is Money, but it's still part of the same series, the Phoenician Secret Doctrine.
And it's going to be a very interesting discussion. As you said, it's the second part to The Power of God, which was published last week. I want to get straight off the bat because you open the article with a very powerful quote, and a quote that not many people are familiar with. And it goes something like, "Millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do." Now, we know that this quote is often attributed to JP Morgan, but there's no research to suggest that he actually said it. Nevertheless, the quote is often cited in discussions about the influence of astrology on successful individuals. Now, our audience is going to think, well, astrology, how does that fit into wealth and success and the economy? So I'm going to cut straight to you because this is certainly interesting listening. And so let's start the discussion about, in your opinion, what do you believe is going on?
Yeah, well, I came across that phrase a long time ago, but it never really made any sense to me. Like most of these things, when you first hear them, you don't understand the true significance of it. And it only really made sense to me, and I went back to it when I was researching the Phoenician Secret Doctrine, when I was researching astronomy and astrology and the connection to cycles and money creation. And then that made sense. But it didn't make sense at the time, because why would a banker care about astrology? I mean, he's not looking at, the way most people use astrology to find out, when's the love of my life going to appear in my life, or something ridiculous like that. What I found was that these bankers, and I'm talking about elite bankers, I'm not talking about your local bank manager here, right? Do use astrology and astronomy to create wealth. And this is one of their biggest secrets. And it's probably one of the reasons why they kind of dumb down astrology, and sort of almost make it like a insignificant kind of pseudoscience. They always promote it as something ridiculous. Oh, young girl with her crystals and a
Yeah, so it causes some sort of misdirection for people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I believe that's done on purpose, because they don't really want people or the science community looking into it. They don't mind if, housewives are using it, or, the back of TV guides are using it. They don't care about that level of astrology, but they don't really want the scientists and physicists looking into it.
Can I just ask something, and you tell me whether you're going to talk about this later or whether it's good to add a reference point now? You talk about the elite bankers that are using astrology. Do we go far back as Masonry at this point, or is this something that you want to include later on? Because we know how the Masons.
Well, no, this goes far. I think this goes back into ancient times. The times of the priest class, because the priest class were astronomers. They used to look at the movement of the celestial bodies. They had to predict when winter was coming, but there was more to it than that. But this is what they didn't disclose, that what they were looking for was patterns in behavior as well, because as anyone who looks into astrology finds that these cycles affect our behavior, human behavior. So that's what they were looking into as well, right? Now, the reason that is important in looking into people's behavior, because it also affects people's purchasing behavior. So this is why it would be important to a merchant or a banker. If there was a time of year or a time in, a decade that they could benefit from, knowing when people are going to be, more interested in less conservative in their spending habits, for instance, this will benefit them. So yeah, they were looking for patterns, cycles in human affairs, basically.
Yeah.
And how it affects the mind.
Can you maybe elaborate on I guess, the difference between astronomy and astrology, because I know that we use it
Okay.
quite
Yeah.
flippantly here, but also how the concept of time relates to that and how the
Okay.
economy is related to that. So this is, again, a
Okay.
much broader discussion.
Okay. So, basically, astronomy is the study of celestial objects, right, in
Mm,
the cosmos, where astrology, and not all scientists agree with this, but
mm,
astrology is the belief that these celestial objects affect the human mind.
mm,
So astronomy is studying the celestial bodies,
mm.
right, and their rhythms, and astrology is the belief that it affects us.
Yep,
Okay, which isn't considered a science by mainstream experts.
yep.
Okay, so now the way we measure time, right? So astronomy is how we measure time because it's basically our clock, the cycles of the day, nights, minutes, seconds, right?
Mm, mm,
How we get our seasons by the orbit of the planet around the sun. So that's how we calculate time. That's how we measure it. Now, then you've got short cycles like day cycles, but then
mm.
you've got your months, years. But then you've got longer cycles too, things that occur every 100 years or 200 years. You get certain, planetary alignments
Sure.
that they always go on about,
Yep.
And so a cycle is basically, a series of events that is repeated in the same order.
Mm,
So it needs to be repeated in the same order to be a cycle. So,
sure.
so it occurs exactly the same way.
Which brings you now on to
Yeah.
why the economy can be, let's call it, predicted, even though that's a loose
Yeah.
term.
Okay. Yeah. Now we get onto that because they found that, well, to go back a bit, President Hoover, after the market crashed in 1929,
Yep.
him and the people around him wanted to understand why these financial crises occurred,
Sure.
right? Why did they come about? So they wanted to understand cycles, like
Mm,
why was there, a Great Depression in this year? Why was there one in this year? They happen
mm,
sort of like, every 10, 20 years or whatever it was.
sure.
And so, yeah, so they founded a foundation called the Foundation for the Studies of Cycles
Mm,
in 1941, it was.
yep.
And so these researchers started gathering data on everything they could find. So this cycles in nature, cycles in the economy, the amount of wheat, the prices of wheat, for
Mm,
example.
mm,
Why do they go up? Why do they go down? Why do certain years you get more of a crop than you do other years?
sure.
Everything they could find that had a rhythm, a cycle to it. This is what they were studying.
Mm,
Okay, and then they released a book of all their data and their findings, and it was called the Cycles, the Science of Prediction. So what they found was there were certain rhythms for the economy, and these rhythms or cycles, you had sort of like 9-year rhythms where certain certain things would repeat.
mm,
And then you had longer cycles that were like 50 years. They found that, every 50 years this happens,
yep.
and even longer ones, so hundreds of years, they go to even thousands of years.
Which we're still seeing to this day when you talk about the financial markets, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also the same with climate predictions. When
Mm,
people go on about climate change, they're usually looking at rhythms that are hundreds of years. So these climate alarmists would go on, oh, yeah, it's the coldest year in 200 years or 100 years.
mm.
Yeah, but why don't you go back 10,000 years or, thousands of years? They don't do that, you see, because it will discredit their position.
But there have been plenty of scientific expeditions that have taken ice samples and have said, "Look, this is the natural phenomenon and of the planet, and it does go in cycles. There was an ice age. There was
Exactly.
after the ice age, it comes again. It goes. It comes again.
These are cycles that we go through, and like I said, you got some that are just a couple of years in length, and then you got others that stretch thousands of years.
Mm,
Now, if you understand these cycles, and you understand that in 100 years in this date, or roughly around this time, something's going to happen, or it's going to get colder, or it's going to get warmer, or
mm,
you
mm.
can prepare.
Of
You can
course.
prepare for these things, right? So for a businessman, concerned with future outcomes,
Mm,
as you know, that is a huge advantage to have. That's that tool to predict what's coming,
Mm.
where you should invest, basically. Next year, in the next couple of years, corn or whatever coffee beans this is where we should be investing, or we should be investing in this area, or
Sure.
they're going to be ahead of the game. I don't believe in these billionaires just lucking it, fluking it. They've just made their money, but they were lucky in the right place at the right time. No, no. They know this science. They know.
And this is a nice little segue before we continue on this path. The billionaires know this science. Now, can we go back to, specifically, let's maybe use the birth of the United States. Are we getting too far ahead of ourselves here? Because I'm going to mention, the
Yeah, I was going to save that for the end, because another thing that that report, that Foundation of Cycles found, was that these patterns affect also the environment, nature, basically. Okay, so that's why we spoke about climate change. So they found that it affects also nature, animals in terms of their behavior.
Yeah.
And again, us humans in our behavior. So what I think is happening now is we're going through a cycle of not reproducing. Okay, one of the biggest concerns in the world right now is that no one's having any children. Okay?
That's right. Yeah, we discussed this in the last podcast.
Yeah, but what they found, these kind of things are part of a cycle. So maybe we're heading towards a colder period, and it's just natural to hibernate, gather your resources. It's not a time to be breeding 5-10 children, as like they used to.
Sure.
Because your resources are going to be limited, so you're not going to be able to feed too many people. So I'm not saying people are thinking about doing this, it's just instinctive. A lot of things affect us without us going through the motions of planning and thinking about it.
Sure.
It just happens.
Okay, so you've mentioned climate or the weather. You've mentioned, I guess, animals and how they go in cycles of hibernation, etc. And you've mentioned, humans. There's one common theme based on your research and based on what I've read in your article is the sun. Did you want to perhaps talk about that and how the sun is related to all those three? And in essence, humans are the ones that haven't quite mastered it yet.
Okay.
Nature has, animals have, but humans haven't.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that, because we spoke about the sun and its effects in the last podcast.
Yes.
And the reason I wrote that part 1 was to actually get to this point that we're about to explore now, right? So that was laying the foundations about what the ancients believed the power of God was. And the power of God was seen as the rays of the sun. But they weren't saying that the sun was God. They just saw it as God sort of used the sun as a conduit, to communicate with us, to contact us, to use its power. So the study, again, this foundation of the cycles, found that what was affecting us was coming from the sun. So the cycles and the effect on us was coming from the sun, but they couldn't really explain how this worked. They just knew that it had to do with electricity. Okay. Electricity due to the sun. So, plasma or, heat or ultraviolet radiation, basically, which is, electrical radiation coming from the sun. This is what was affecting us. Okay. But it's not just the sun. See, the way I see it is it's the celestial bodies at certain times with the angles of their movements. When they hit the sun or the light, it has a different effect every time, because the planets affect us differently. So if it's Mars at the time, it's going to have a certain effect. If it's Jupiter, and then again, if it's an alignment, if it's Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Venus, you get these crazy alignments, then that has a different effect. All right. So all these alignments have different effects. These cycles, according to them, are associated with solar phenomena. So it has to do with variations in heat. Okay. So that's how they measure the variations in heat. Basically, it's ultraviolet radiation that creates these variations.
And hence creates what we have termed cycles.
No, the effect of the cycles on us.
The
so
effect.
These variations, obviously, so these variations in heat affect, one, the Earth's atmosphere, right? And then, if that affects the Earth's atmosphere, then it affects all the biological, things on the planet, which
Hmm.
are
Hmm.
animals and which are us as
Sure.
well. So it's the variations of heat that affect
Okay.
us, right? These variations in heat also affect the psychological processes of man,
Okay.
right?
That makes sense. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so can I just maybe say what you're alluding to in your article is where you say that if I can just maybe take a couple of seconds to read this out, Dewey and Dakin could not determine the ultimate origin of these cycles or rhythms, only to suggest that the sun appears to be directly or indirectly involved. And then you pose the question, is this the reason the ancients venerated the heavenly bodies and particularly the sun? So perhaps if you just work on that and just
Yeah.
explain what you mean by that and how deep it goes.
Yeah. Basically, they found that this energy that was affecting us was coming through the sun. And yes, I do believe that this is where the idea of sun worship comes from. And again, with the same thing with astrology, where they dumb it down and give us the real, the peasants version of it. They've done the same with sun worship. So, you hear a lot of people and Christians say, oh, pagans were just sun worshippers. Oh, the sun, how dumb, No, there was a lot more to it. They understood this. They understood there was something more to it. It's just that you haven't understood it and you've been given the dumbed down version because
Mm,
they wanted to keep it a secret. They wanted
mm,
that because it's science. It's a sacred science. They wanted to keep it a secret.
right.
Okay. So that's why I do believe that's where, sun worship has sort of come from that understanding.
Well, what we have discussed in previous podcasts was, even the Egyptians were sun worshippers, and we know that in
Yeah.
quite detail. But can you maybe explain, and this probably goes on the topic of control, why they chose to keep it secret? Was it
Okay.
something that they knew? And again, we can morph into the discussion of Freemasonry or Masons and why they know things that
Yeah.
we don't. It's about control, essentially. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to probably make it a little bit clearer how this would work. Science would work for the benefit of the merchant class, for instance. Okay,
Mm, mm,
so it's funny how Hollywood always tell us these things in a kind of way, in a comical way. Where we sort of don't understand the message, the underlying message they're trying to tell us. But I always say that Hollywood push out this stuff. They're trying to tell you something. And a great example of this is Back to the Future.
mm,
The 80s film series Back to the Future. And
mm,
so the way this would work was the character in the movie called Biff. For those who haven't seen it, he goes back in time to give him an earlier version of himself,
mm, mm.
a book which has all the results of every sports event in America.
Which
So,
they call it the almanac in the movie, which I remember that quite clearly.
yeah,
One of my favorite movies. Yeah, yeah.
almanac. He gives himself this book. Yeah, he goes into the past to give himself this book. So in the future, he's got access to all the results of these sporting events. So all he has to
Mm,
do is basically bet on the winner, and he'll
mm,
win every time. So that's
correct.
how he makes his wealth.
Yep.
This would work in the same way for these merchants, right? They
Okay.
know the
Okay.
result, the outcome. They know the
Mm,
outcome of what's
mm.
coming, the economic outcome of what's coming. So all they have to do is bet on it, basically, invest in that area.
Based on cycles and trends,
Yeah,
as you've
exactly,
spoken. So they don't
exactly.
necessarily have, an almanac, for example, but they have historical evidence of cycles and trends that they
Yeah,
choose to keep to themselves because if the masses knew, then there'll be less for them.
yeah, yeah. Well, they're always going to win. They're always going to make money, no matter what your situation is. They're always going to win because they know
Yeah,
they're always one step ahead.
yeah, I think it's prudent to maybe bring to the discussion now, and I think and to be honest, I didn't know this, but can you elaborate? And this is relevant to what we've been talking about, but can you elaborate on also why the founding fathers in America specifically chose, the July 4th, 1776, as its official birth date, for example.
Yeah, well, the Freemasons are aware, or some element of the Freemason
Brotherhood.
brotherhood, whatever you want to call it, fraternity, is aware of this science. Doesn't mean all members of Freemasonry are, but the top would know that they wouldn't understand this sacred science. And you see this evident in some of the decisions they make. I think it's related to a lot of the revolutions that spark at certain times around the world. I think they're using the cycles to benefit from, their revolution. For instance, if they were to do it at a certain time, maybe the people are not angry enough or encouraged enough to go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if they do it on a specific date that they understand that it will affect human behavior in a certain way, they'll pick and choose the dates that they know they can get the outcome that they desire, basically.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting that they chose that date in particular because they understood, as you've said, the basics of astrology. And if I can just quote from
Yeah. Oh,
your...
you read. Yeah, you can go ahead and read
Well,
the.
no, I won't read it because I'll allow our listeners to go to jump into your
Yeah.
Substack
Right.
at
Yeah.
substack.com/Phoenician Hunter. But basically, they understood that the combination of the Sun, Jupiter, and Venus in the second house of wealth aligned for America to be a country, or when it was born, to be a country of extreme wealth. And as we know today,
Yeah.
perhaps not at this current point because the United States is going through some turmoil, but they have been leaders of the free world because of the strength of their economy and the strength of their dollar. So the Masons obviously knew that way back in 1776. And what really struck me in your article was that they even chose a specific time to do it, which you've
Yeah.
written as
Wow. Which I did.
between 2
Yeah,
a.m.
I
to
didn't know.
2:30 a.m. Yeah. So it really funnels down to those specifics that they have used over time, over our history, to create wealth or whatever it might be, predominantly wealth, obviously. So what you're saying is that through cycles and trends, if we delve a little deeper, and I encourage people to read your article and do their own research and also research into astrology and astronomy, but particularly astrology, they can obviously create a different reality for themselves.
Yeah, what you're referring to there with the birth date of the nation of America was something that was discovered by a researcher called Robert Gover.
Mm.
And he wrote a book called Time and Money, the Economy and the Planets. So he was an astrologer, but he looked at astrology through, a scientific viewpoint, right? And like you said, he found that they chose the date right down to, the minutes,
Mm.
which proves that these, at least the Masons, have got this science down to, those kind of details.
Mm.
Down to minutes. So they're not guessing in terms of decades. It's not like
Mm.
a round figure to these people. Oh, roughly in the next 10 years.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean? They can get it down to a day, to the hour. To
But
have
that,
that kind of knowledge is immense. And to have it kept secret for so long
mm.
is incredible.
And now that
Yeah.
that this is becoming a little bit more public in terms of its disclosure, anyone can apply this theory, correct?
Yeah, but I mean, who's got access to their records,
I guess access to their records, but if somebody knows astrology well enough to know that if the
Yeah.
Sun and Jupiter and Venus are in the second house of wealth, and again, a simple Google search can take you down a rabbit hole that can enlighten you to the point where you could try things, you could experiment.
No, you're right. I mean, now that you've got scientists and engineers or whatever looking into this stuff,
Mm.
like I said, that's why it's not encouraged, because it's almost made fun of. Oh, you study astrology, you're a
Yeah,
nut.
yeah, yeah.
That it's not considered a mainstream science.
Sure.
So until that happens, you're not going to get a lot of these science people looking into it. But yeah, I agree with you that it can be rediscovered through, independent researchers can probably rediscover it, but there's a lot of things that need to be mentioned, and that is the chronology that we follow that has been given to us. I don't believe is accurate. And I've written about this on my Substack that in the past they've stuffed with the calendars, as you know.
Yes.
The Catholic Church changed the calendar,
The Gregorian
and
calendar that we use
yeah,
today.
exactly. But
Yeah.
I also believe they've stuffed with dates. They've added 1,000 years, 700 to 1,000 years to our timeline.
Well, that calls for,
Events are not. I
yeah,
was just going to say, events are not where they should be.
yeah,
Other events are pushed forward. Do you know what I mean? So if
yeah.
you're looking at this from that point of view, you're not going to get an accurate reading. And they've probably done that on purpose for
Of
to
course they
distort
have.
it.
Well, of course they
You
have, and
know.
you can go. This discussion branches off into so many other separate discussions about
Yeah.
Terria, about mud floods. If anyone was to go and just literally stare at or look at a really old building that has, up the very top, it has when it was built or supposedly built. It has something like 1826, for example. But if they look closely, the one is not actually a one. So, people are saying
Well,
it's the year
yeah.
896, not 1896.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think it's a J for Julian, but I mean,
a J for
that's
Julian,
just
a
me.
J for Jesus. It's like, there's discussion happening. So, but that's again one tentacle of this discussion, which I think
Yeah.
is important to
and
have.
and bringing up the mud flood and stuff, and which is not something I've researched extensively, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of it. And this, like an event like that, they would, if something did happen, right, and
Yeah,
then they took it from public view, they hid it from public view,
yeah,
they're able to foretell if it's going to happen again or when it's going to happen again,
right.
if it's something that is part of a cycle.
Mm,
So that would be one reason why they would keep something like that a secret. That it happened, if it happened 200 years ago, they know it's going to happen in whenever it's going to reoccur, so they'll keep it a
sure.
secret.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, that event could have been a one-off too. We don't know.
Mm,
It could have been a freak event. Something came into the solar system that didn't belong, threw things out of orbit or whatever. We don't know.
mm,
I don't
mm, mm.
know. We don't know if that was a one-off event or not.
Of course, of
Um,
course. But again,
so
what can we believe? As they say, history is a set of lies agreed upon. Which is a famous saying that's been attributed to Napoleon. So again, if he was a real character, he would have known something at the time. So what's your
I,
your uptake?
Yeah. So going back to the thing you brought up about the house of money, or the house of
Mm,
wealth, as they
mm,
call
mm,
it,
mm.
attributed to America. Obviously most of the founding fathers were Freemasons, so they would have known this, and that's why they chose that date. And since America's founding, it has just progressively become the richest country in the world. Like over a short period of time, we're only talking about 200 odd years.
Mm, mm.
From the 1800s. So the merchants who, dominated that country, they chose that date because they knew it was going to bring them wealth. You were saying that America's probably
In a bit of
going to go
turmoil at the
is
moment.
going a
Yeah,
downturn. What did you
yeah.
say? It was,
Yeah, it was going through some turmoil at the moment because
yeah,
the world does not see America as the leader of the free world anymore because of
yeah,
everything
but they're
that's
still
going.
wealthy. But the other point is that maybe they knew that it was only going to last a certain amount of time.
Mm,
You see, this is the thing. They know how long its wealth's going to last. But and then it might come back. It might be 200-300 years of immense wealth
sure.
and prosperity, and then it changes. It's a cycle. Okay. And then another country will, it's like England had it for quite a long time,
Yeah, yeah,
Britain, the British Empire,
yeah.
and now they say it's going east. It might be part of this whole cycle. You can follow the merchants by seeing where they start investing. So if you follow their patterns and then they start investing somewhere east or
Well,
something, you can see they're moving that way,
yeah,
perhaps.
look, I can mention things like, what, BlackRock and Larry Fink are doing at the moment with cryptocurrency, for example. Does that mean that everyone jumps onto cryptocurrency because the world's biggest holders of, wealth portfolios is going in that direction? I'm not sure whether you have an opinion on that.
Well, no, again, it's all connected because it's all part of cycles, right?
Mm, mm,
So they're obviously, if they are going to move us in that direction, it's probably because they know something that we don't.
sure.
Whatever that may be, that I don't know, is something where I'm just going to throw a ridiculous example
Sure.
where they might manufacture another virus and they say, oh, it's spread through paper and money. We're going to ban money for your own health,
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
something like that. I don't
Yeah,
know, but
yeah.
I'm just saying. So they already know that we're going to move off it anyway. So let's invest there, for
Okay,
example.
so can I give you a hypothetical? It's a hypothetical question. We know all this, right? Or we don't know all of it, but we know enough to understand that whether it's Freemasonry or any other association, that astrology plays an important part. Trends and cycles plays an important
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
Can we, as a society, the non-elites, let's call us, can we do anything to try and shift the balance of power, so to speak?
Well, that's difficult because one of the effects of the cycles, which is probably more important than the economy,
Mm,
is the effect it has on mankind, like on the manipulation of our minds,
mm, mm,
right? That's another huge part of this because they can direct us where they want. They can tap into our thoughts and feelings, and they just sort of, it's like we're like a school of fish, right? And they
mhm.
hold the bait. They just swing us from one point to the next, and we just follow.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Maybe a few can you sort of disconnect from it,
Mhm.
but the majority won't. And I mean, COVID was a great example of that.
No, it was a very good
Where
example. Yeah.
how many people just said it, no, I'm not listening to, turn the TV off
Mhm.
firstly.
Yes.
That's the first thing you got to do.
I
Even with the TV off, I haven't had a television in my house for years, but
same.
but the people around you are affected by it. So they in turn affect you. So, you're not going to run away from it, basically.
How do you think we can, obviously through the platforms like this podcast and these discussions and, spreading the message across social media, without being labeled as crackpots or nut jobs, how can we get the message across? Because when I say to people, the first step
Okay.
for you to
Yeah.
awaken is to turn off your television and stop listening to commercial radio, commercial television, commercial newspapers,
Okay.
etc. What are your thoughts?
Okay. I might take it in a different direction, but
Okay.
what I've noticed with a lot of researchers is they'll produce good papers or good articles or whatever. But what I find is they're always coming from a certain belief system.
Mm,
Okay. So you've got people who would say, it's this group doing everything and this group doing everything, or this is evil. And then you find that they've got a certain set of beliefs.
yeah.
So obviously they're not going to look at those set of beliefs and point the finger in that direction or anything associated with that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, for instance, there's a certain group. I'll give you an example, right? So, if evangelical Christians would say a lot of the New World Order or a lot of the evil in the world is the Vatican, it's the Jesuits,
Hmm.
okay?
Hmm.
And it's not the Jews because they're God's chosen people. And the Jews that are doing all the evil are actually not Jews. They're Zionists and they're
Yes.
Khazarian. And they
Correct.
just,
Yeah.
because they say that because their belief system doesn't allow them to point the finger as that certain group because they're God's chosen people and they believe the word of God, the word of the Bible,
Right.
and they're not going to go there. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so they'll manufacture or look everywhere but there. They point the finger at everyone else but there. And then you've got the other group which will say, no, it is the Jews. They're Satan worshippers and
Mm-hmm.
the evil, and they're doing all this stuff. And then they completely ignore the British or Anglo stock in all this. And that's huge, right? That's a huge, huge element. And I've written a lot about that, and this as well. The British Empire is behind a lot of this stuff, a
Of
lot,
course. Of course.
right? And America is too.
Mm.
And, a lot of patriotic Americans won't go there because in some way they feel that it gives themselves a bad name or themselves a bad look. But I
Mm.
mean, you as an American citizen are not part of what, your government is responsible for. So, you shouldn't feel responsible for any of the actions that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So then, yeah, you'll have people that won't point the finger in that direction. Or
Mm.
the way I approach it is to throw out all belief systems. It's the only way to approach it, to not have a biased view on anything. So you can't bring your beliefs into this. Otherwise, you're not gonna see it for what it is. You're not gonna see it clearly. Okay. So people looking into this stuff, oh no, that's satanic or
Mm-hmm.
that's ridiculous sun worship. Back to your original question, the
Mm.
only way we're going to understand any of this is to get to the truth. But you're not going to get to the truth if you're approaching it from a certain point of view,
Sure.
which is attached to your belief system. That's you're going to have to let all that go. You have to let it all go. And this gets into what people say about the ego, and you got to let the ego go. You got to kill it. You got to kill the ego.
Yeah.
You got to come not knowing, come as a little child, and like not knowing. You got to come as asking questions. Just ask questions.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid, and don't be afraid of the answers. That's my approach anyway.
It's a bit of a hard one because,
It is.
as we know, humanity or human behavior, they're reluctant to change. And this is a major, like this is a paradigm shift in a belief system. And to say to the masses, forget what you know. You need to go in there with a virgin mind. I don't like to be a
Hard.
pessimist because I'm always optimistic, but it is a monumental task because you're assuming that the mass populace is prepared to do that. And I can tell you now that based on what I've read in terms of human psychology, that's a mammoth task.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. And I'm not suggesting that I've got all the answers, and that
Mhm.
my research is 100% correct where someone else's isn't. I
Right.
might be wrong. My sources might be wrong, or I've
Mm.
misinterpreted something. But at least I approach it from an unbiased viewpoint. I
Mm.
don't come in there with a set of beliefs and approach the research in that way. I'm completely
Unbiased, and you're completely open
yeah,
to
exactly.
new things. And again, this is what we encourage our listeners to do on a regular basis throughout all our podcasts, even from the very first podcast where we spoke about the origin or the etymology of words and how they're spells, etc. I think it's our duty to some degree that we are exposed to this information to tell others to do some basic, even desktop research, just to sit on
Yeah.
Google and say, okay, what's a Freemason? What's a Jesuit? How do cycles affect the economy? How do cycles affect the weather? What's the relevance of the sun? Who are these gods of Egypt, gods of Greece?
Yeah.
How does it go back to Samaria, to Phoenicians?
Yeah.
Not
No,
expecting
the reason people are they're content in the belief system that's been created.
And that's my point, is that we need to slightly push them into just doing very basic, because I know that when you say to people, oh, do you know X, Y, and Z, they then dive into a rabbit hole and they come out as if they've been baptized, for the sake of using a better word, but they come out and they think, I didn't know that was the case. I didn't know that existed. I didn't know you could do that. So I guess in some regard, what I'm trying to say here is that it's our duty, as you as a researcher, me as a researcher to some degree, but knowledgeable across a number of different topics. We have a duty to tell people, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that? Again, I know it's difficult because you've used COVID as an example. People would call you a crackpot for having
That's
an opinion
yeah. Well,
that goes against the
I
narrative.
yeah, I've had a few well, what I would call truth seekers, people who have looked into, this kind of stuff,
Mm.
at least on a basic level, who've told me that they were really surprised by human behavior during COVID. They were like so surprised by family and friends and their
Mm.
behavior, and I go,
Mm.
really? It did not surprise me in the least.
Yeah, but tell me why, because this will probably give a little bit of an insight to our
Yeah,
listeners into how you as a
yeah.
researcher.
I was not surprised by the least in the behavior of people, and I actually thought it was going to get worse.
Right.
Like the old, why did I know that? Because history tells you this.
Mm.
The pitchfork and burn him to the stake.
Burn the stake, yeah, of course.
He's different. Oh, look, kill him. He's taller than everyone else. Kill him. It's
Mm.
like they tell you in media as well, and they've even done funny skits in The Simpsons where they think, oh, I think it was
Yeah, of
Mr. Burns.
course.
They think he's an alien. Kill it, kill it.
Yeah,
Take
of
the
course, of course, yeah.
you know, it's human behavior, and they make fun of it. The Hollywood makes fun of you because
Mm.
they know how you are. They know how people behave, and
Yeah.
when people are fearful, they're gonna kill.
Mm.
And I wasn't surprised by people's behavior at all. It's like, oh, what, you're not vaccinated? Oh my God, you're a threat to me.
Mhm.
That kind of thing. No, I wasn't surprised. I just tried to stay away from people as much as possible during that period,
Right.
and copying, people trying to, who thought they knew better than me and thought
Mm,
that what was best for me, kept telling me so. And I just
mm,
politely, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, but politely had to sort of just say, nod my head. Yep. Thanks for your concern, and just go
and
on
keep on moving.
with
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I faced precisely the same reactions, but for me, it was more of a learning journey.
Right.
And you go through all these different types of emotions when you first encounter it. Okay, you saw it coming, and it wasn't surprising the way people reacted. For me, it was like, why are people reacting this way? Which then
Okay.
took me down a path of discovery, a path of research to find out, was I a crackpot for thinking and doing what I was doing?
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and and here we are today, right? We're a lot more enlightened. We're a lot more educated about, our history and what's happened. So, in closing, what would be the main, I guess, message that you would impart to our listeners?
Well, yeah,
Again,
we've shifted a little bit from the
we have,
topic of,
we have.
but it's all related.
Mm,
And because one of the big factors from this research on this particular topic was the manipulation that they're able to sort of have on the minds of people.
mm,
Okay.
mm,
And COVID was a perfect example of that. So
mm.
either they knew that a cycle was going to come where they
Sure.
could use a virus. And I'm like you on this. I don't believe there was actually a virus at all, but
Mm,
they probably knew there was a certain period where their plan could be enhanced.
mm,
Okay. So a cycle where something like that would go off in people's minds and people's fears
mm,
could be expanded upon and exaggerated, right?
mm.
I'm certain of it. They chose that date for a reason, right? And it was all
Well,
had to do with rhythms and cycles,
Well,
right?
can you tie it back to with COVID in particular? Can you tie it back to the Spanish flu, for example, in 1918?
Well,
That to me was
that
carbon
was
copy of
another.
all.
That was like exactly sort of like almost like 100 years. All right, so
Mm-hmm.
it was maybe a cycle. Yeah, it was probably part of a cycle. And if you look at there was some crazy alignments around in
Mm,
2019, 2020 as well,
of course,
right, with
yeah,
the
yeah,
planets.
yeah.
So if you want to look into that,
Oh,
it
yes,
is
of
evidence
course.
there that the celestial bodies could have had an effect
Mm,
with the cycles. But going back to something you said, yeah, the reason I probably wasn't surprised was my background in etymology,
mm.
and that's why I wrote the book. And people listening to this, I encourage you to, if you haven't yet, get a copy of my book, or you can subscribe and get a copy of it, a digital copy through Substack,
And you can go
because
to just while we're at it,
yeah,
substack.com/Phoenician Hunter. Very easy to
yeah.
find. Subscribe, and I'll tell you what, you'll learn a great deal. But anyway,
Yeah, just quickly, my research to that allow me to see human behavior
mm,
and how it was easily manipulated through images and words. When I saw the visuals and when I saw the words of COVID and the words they were using, and the fear porn on TV and all
mm,
this,
mm,
I could tell what the reaction was going to be. I could
sure.
tell because of my study into etymology and the effects that words and vibrations have on the minds of people. That's why that is important, because once you understand that, nothing surprises you. That's what they use as their tool. They use words and they use images to manipulate us. Okay.
Symbolism. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, no, it's just vibration, really.
yeah,
That's why they do the things they do on TV and with the media
yeah.
and
What they call predictive programming. Well, look, that's been a great discussion. Like I said, I encourage our listeners to go to your Substack channel and either subscribe or at least read a couple of the well-researched articles that you've published. But in summation, I think this discussion has been quite insightful. And again, when we talk about trends and cycles, when we talk about the sun, when we talk about what certain groups like the Freemasons are aware of when it comes to astrology. So thanks again, Phoenician Hunter, for your time. What an interesting discussion was had yet again. I encourage people to visit your Substack at substack.com/@Phoenician Hunter, and to maybe access our previous 7 or 8 podcasts across different topics at youtube.com/Tesla369. Look forward to our next discussion next week. In the meantime, stay well.